In just 8 minutes, get the key takeaways from Tucker Carlson's explosive 2-hour interview with Mike Benz, posted on February 8, 2025. From media manipulation to secret government tactics, Benz uncovers shocking truths about censorship, USAID, and global power plays. Stay till the end. You won't believe how these strategies are now being used inside the U.S. Here are the key takeaways from the podcast. Takeaway 1. USAID's hidden power over media. Many people are only now discovering that USAID funds 90% of Ukraine's media. USAID's influence extends beyond Ukraine. It funds media organizations globally. This gives the U.S. government indirect control over narratives in foreign countries. It also affects public perception at home, since these media reports often make their way into Western news. For example, a story in Ukraine about government transparency might seem like independent journalism, but if USAID funds the media outlet, the story could be serving a larger U.S. foreign policy goal. Question for you. Did you know that foreign media is funded by U.S. taxpayer money? Comment below with your thoughts. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 2. Censorship is a foreign policy tool. Internet censorship is often assumed to be a domestic issue, but it has global roots. Many internet regulation policies originate from U.S. foreign policy efforts. The government uses military contractors and intelligence agencies to control online discourse. Censorship is not just about silencing opinions, it serves a strategic geopolitical interests. For example, social media platforms were heavily pressured to remove voices that opposed U.S. policies on Ukraine, climate change, and even COVID-19. What seems like a fair effort to combat misinformation is often just political narrative control. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 3. The Truman Show effect of U.S. foreign policy. Many people live in a reality shaped by controlled information. USAID, NGOs, and government-funded media create a false sense of independence. The illusion of free press is shattered when you realize who funds these institutions. The world is waking up to the extent of manipulation by U.S. soft power. For example, people in Europe might believe they are reading an independent investigative report about corruption in Russia. In reality, that report may be funded by USAID to push a specific narrative beneficial to U.S. interests. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 4. The strategy behind foreign aid. USAID is often presented as a humanitarian organization, but it serves strategic goals. When criticized, defenders first claim it promotes democracy. When that argument fails, they admit it's about U.S. national interests, such as securing resources. USAID is a geopolitical tool disguised as charity. For example, aid to Ukraine is often justified as supporting democracy. However, when questioned about corruption or election cancellations, the narrative shifts to protecting U.S. access to resources and markets. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 5. How USAID secretly organizes riots. USAID has a long history of funding activist groups to destabilize governments. This includes training, funding, and even organizing street protests. The process often begins with funding cultural events, student groups, and artists. When needed, these groups can be activated to create political uprisings. For example, USAID-backed groups in Bangladesh received funds to promote rap music and street protests. The goal was to create dissatisfaction with the government, which the U.S. wanted to replace. We're halfway through the video. Thank you for sticking with us this far. If you're enjoying it, please give us a thumbs up and share it in your WhatsApp groups. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to comment below. To see more videos like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Now let's continue with the video. Takeaway 6. The double-edged sword of U.S. soft power. U.S. influence through soft power is sometimes necessary for national interests. However, when used irresponsibly, it leads to chaos and distrust. Many foreign governments are now rejecting U.S. aid because of its interference. The question is whether the U.S. can reform its soft power tactics rather than destroy them. For example, El Salvador recently refused U.S. aid assistance, realizing it was being used to influence domestic policies rather than provide actual humanitarian support. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 7. The Transgender Dance Festival controversy. USAID has been funding LGBTQ+ programs in foreign countries, sometimes controversially. Some argue this is about human rights, but in reality, it's a geopolitical strategy. Promoting certain cultural values helps align foreign populations with U.S. interests. These tactics are often used in regime change operations. For example, in Bangladesh, USAID funded transgender dance festivals as part of a larger political destabilization effort. This was not about LGBTQ+ rights. It was about shifting political power. Question for you. Do you think foreign aid should be used for cultural influence? Let us know in the comments. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 8. USAID's role in social media censorship. USAID has been involved in pressuring tech companies to implement censorship policies. This is done by funding NGOs that lobby for content moderation. The goal is to control online discourse on topics like elections, pandemics, and geopolitics. U.S. citizens are indirectly funding censorship efforts against their own opinions. For example, a social media post questioning a war narrative might be removed not because it's false, but because it conflicts with USAID-funded media campaigns. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 9. Why the U.S. funds investigative journalism abroad. USAID and the State Department fund investigative journalism to push political agendas. The goal is to create media scandals that justify political action. These reports are often used to force resignations, policy changes, or even regime change. It's less about truth and more about strategic influence. For example, an anti-corruption group funded by USAID in Ukraine helped create the political crisis that led to government changes aligned with U.S. interests. Now let's move to the last takeaway. Takeaway 10. How USAID's tactics are now used domestically. The same strategies used abroad are now being applied inside the U.S. This includes media control, social unrest, and even law enforcement actions. Political opponents are targeted in ways similar to foreign regime change efforts. The public is slowly realizing that these tactics are not just for foreign policy anymore. For example, media-driven scandals, protests, and even FBI investigations often follow the same patterns as USAID operations in other countries. The difference? This time, the target is domestic. Here is a brief introduction about Mike Benz. Mike Benz is a former U.S. State Department official and the executive director of the Foundation for Freedom Online, FFO. He specializes in investigating censorship, government influence over social media, and the role of NGOs in global politics. With deep insights into U.S. foreign policy, information warfare, and media manipulation, Benz has exposed how institutions like USAID shape narratives both abroad and domestically. His work focuses on defending free speech and uncovering hidden government agendas in the digital age. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this summary of the Tucker Carlson podcast with Mike Benz informative. If you're interested in learning more about these topics, I encourage you to watch the full podcast on YouTube. If you enjoyed watching this video, please leave a like below and share this video in your WhatsApp groups. You can also discuss about this video by commenting below. To get more such videos in your timeline, press the subscribe button below.